Society preaches that a child is a parent's greatest, most enduring legacy. They tell you that the blood you share is an unbreakable covenant, a permanent guarantee of shelter and warmth in your twilight years. What they intentionally omit is the darker, far more common reality. Sometimes, the legacy you raised is simply waiting for you to weaken so they can harvest your remains. They do not want your wisdom. They want your vault. I learned this devastating lesson on a freezing Tuesday morning, standing inside a federal courtroom. I walked slowly down the center aisle of courtroom 4. I was wearing simple, mud-stained country clothes, worn-out leatherwork boots. I held a battered canvas Stetson hat in my trembling hands. I looked exactly like a lost, confused old farmer who had wandered blindly into the wrong building. My daughter, Caroline, sat at the plaintiff's table. She smirked. Her husband, Damien, shook his head with open, unadulterated contempt. I heard her choked laugh. It was a sharp sound designed to cut through my chest like a serrated knife. To them, I was a pathetic embarrassment, an inconvenience, a silly old fool who was about to be legally erased from his own life. But then, the presiding judge looked up from his heavy docket. His eyes met mine. I watched the color drain entirely from his face. His hand began to tremble violently over his wooden gavel. His lips parted, and he whispered something that silenced the entire, bustling courtroom. "My God," the judge breathed. His voice was thin and terrified. "Is it really him?" Everyone turned to stare. The silence became physical. It was so thick I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears. Caroline's arrogant smirk vanished. Damien frowned, staring at the judge as if the man had lost his mind. They had absolutely no idea who I truly was. Not until that exact fraction of a second. My name is Elias Thorne. I am 68 years old. I live a quiet, deeply isolated life on a sprawling, 300-acre horse ranch in Montana. But before I retired to the snow-capped mountains, I spent 35 years as a federal court judge. I authored the state's most stringent financial protection laws. I put cartel bosses, corporate embezzlers, and corrupt politicians behind bars. I am currently healing from wounds my own family inflicted. But I'm not a victim. I am the executioner. Please find a comfortable seat. This story is going to take you somewhere very dark and very calculated. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to love it here. It all started exactly 3 months ago. Since my beautiful wife, Sarah, passed away 2 years prior, my Montana ranch had been my entire world. It was a quiet sanctuary, a place where I could breed quarter horses, split firewood, and sit on the back porch remembering the glorious decades Sarah and I had shared. I had gladly handed over the complex financial chores of my estate to my son-in-law, Damien. Damien was 38. He was a slick, fast-talking former CEO of a cryptocurrency fund that had recently collapsed. He wore bespoke suits and projected massive wealth. He married my daughter, Caroline, 10 years ago. I trusted them. They were my blood. On a peaceful Thursday afternoon, I walked down the long, gravel driveway to check the mail. Among the feed catalogs and local flyers, there was a thick envelope. It bore a bright red, urgent stamp from the county tax assessor. I tore it open. I expected a routine receipt. Instead, the bold black letters at the top of the page stopped the breath in my lungs. Final notice of default. Imminent foreclosure warning. I stood there in the driveway. The autumn wind suddenly felt like ice against my skin. I read the legal document 3 times. It stated that my property taxes were 90 days past due. If the balance was not settled immediately, the county would seize the ranch. This made absolutely zero logical sense. Exactly 1 month prior, I had authorized a wire transfer of $45,000 directly into Damien's primary account specifically to cover these taxes. He had assured me over Sunday dinner that the ledger was balanced. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from a sudden, sharp spike of investigative adrenaline. I dialed Caroline's number. She answered on the 4th ring. Background noise of an upscale restaurant bled through the speaker. "Hello, Dad," Caroline said briskly. "I'm in the middle of a lunch meeting." Can I call you back? Caroline, I need to know why I just received a foreclosure warning, I said. I kept my voice perfectly level. I gave Damien $45,000 4 weeks ago. What's going on? There was a long pause. The background noise muffled. Dad, calm down, she said. Her tone dripped with that patronizing sweetness you use to soothe a panicked toddler. Damien handled that. You probably just got a delayed, automated letter. You're getting worked up over nothing. Do not worry about it. We will drive up to the ranch tonight and sort it out. Just rest. They arrived just after sunset. The headlights of Damien's sleek, black Range Rover swept across my porch. Damien stepped out first. He looked entirely unbothered. Caroline followed, clutching a $5,000 designer handbag. I invited them into the living room. I placed the red-stamped default notice squarely on the coffee table. Explain this to me, Damien, I demanded. Damien didn't even look at the paper. He unbuttoned his jacket, sat back on my leather sofa with arrogant ease, and sighed. Elias, you are obsessing over clerical errors, Damien said smoothly. I pay the taxes. The county administration is notoriously slow. You know how these government bureaucracies operate. This letter was printed 3 days ago, I countered. I tapped the date. It explicitly says no payment has been received. If you paid it, show me the bank confirmation receipt right now. Damien exchanged a quick, exasperated look with Caroline. It was a look that screamed, here we go again with a crazy old man. Dad, stop interrogating him. Caroline snapped. She stepped forward. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on Damien's shoulder. He is doing you a massive favor by managing your accounts. You have been forgetting everything lately. You are confused. I am not confused, Caroline. I am reading a legal document. You are confused, Dad, she insisted. She raised her voice just enough to dominate the room. Her eyes locked onto mine. Unyielding. Cold. Do you not realize how bad your memory has gotten? Yesterday, we stopped by while you were napping. The wood-burning stove in the guest cabin was left roaring with the door wide open. Embers were spitting onto the rug. You could have burned the entire estate down and died in your sleep, Dad. We had to put the fire out ourselves. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the howling wind outside the timber walls. The wood-burning stove. For a fraction of a second, my mind played tricks on me. I imagined the smell of smoke. But then the razor-sharp intellect of a federal judge violently awoke. I looked toward the hallway leading to the guest cabin. I did not leave the wood-burning stove on yesterday. It was physically, architecturally impossible for me to have done so. 3 years ago, Sarah complained about the draft coming from that specific chimney. I personally hired a crew of masons. We ripped the iron stove out entirely. We poured 3 feet of solid, reinforced concrete down the chimney shaft and sealed the wall with drywall. The stove literally did not exist anymore. A terrifying, icy realization washed over my entire nervous system. I was not losing my mind. My daughter was deliberately, maliciously lying to my face. Why? Why construct an elaborate, verifiable lie about me burning the house down? Why would Damien look so completely calm about a missing $45,000? If I were just a regular, grieving old rancher, I would have broken down right then and there. I would have surrendered my independence. But they forgot one crucial detail. I spent 3 decades staring into the eyes of the most ruthless sociopaths in the country. I know exactly what a calculated lie looks like. My gut screamed at me to throw them out into the snow, to demand my money. But my legal instincts kicked in. Cold, calculating. If I confronted them now, without solid proof, they would escalate their narrative. They would use my anger as further proof of my supposed mental instability. To win this war, I had to let them believe they had won the battle. I let my shoulders slump. I forced my hands to shake visibly. I looked down at the floorboards, imitating the posture of a defeated, confused senior citizen. I left the stove open. I murmured. I let my voice crack with manufactured vulnerability. Yes, Dad, Caroline said. Her voice instantly softened back into that fake, sugary tone. It terrified us. You're getting older. You cannot handle all this stress anymore. You might be right, I whispered. I'm just so tired. Damien smirked. I will call the county assessor on Monday, Elias. Just focus on resting. As they drove away into the dark night, my sadness evaporated. It was entirely replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. They thought I was a clueless old man waiting to die. They had just woken up a sleeping lion. Court was officially in session. The morning after their visit, Caroline showed up at the ranch before the sun had even crested the snow-capped peaks. She walked into my kitchen holding a small, unmarked amber prescription bottle. She sat on the granite counter next to my coffee maker. "Dad, I spoke with Dr. Harris in the city this morning," Caroline said warmly. "He agrees with Damien and me. The grief is taking a toll on your cognitive functions. He prescribed these vitamins. They will help support your memory and clear the fog." I stared at the little amber bottle. It looked innocent, small white capsules, but a very old, very cynical voice in the back of my head, the voice that had interrogated cartel accountants, whispered a warning. "Do not swallow them." I knew I should listen to that sharp instinct. But this was my daughter, the girl I taught to ride horses on this very land. I had to know for sure. I unscrewed the cap. I took out a pill. I placed it in my mouth and took a sip of coffee. Caroline beamed, kissed my cheek, and left the city. The moment her SUV cleared the front gates, I spat the dissolving capsule directly into my palm. I walked to the bathroom and flushed it down the toilet. I washed my mouth out 3 times. I needed proof of what was hidden inside those capsules. I knew better than to visit my regular physician in Bozeman. Caroline was listed as my emergency contact and possessed medical proxy rights on my file. Any toxicology test requested locally would trigger an automatic digital alert to her smartphone. I had to go completely off the grid. I bypassed my modern Mercedes sedan equipped with GPS tracking. I walked to the back of the barn. Under a dusty tarp sat my 1994 Ford F-150. It had manual windows, a stick shift, and absolutely zero computer chips. I grabbed the keys, tossed the amber pill bottle onto the cracked vinyl passenger seat, and turned the ignition. The old V8 engine roared to life with a mechanical grumble. I drove 100 miles deep into the Bitterroot Mountains, taking unpaved logging roads until I reached a highly isolated rural clinic. The waiting room was empty. The air smelled of old magazines and antiseptic. I walked up to the reception desk. I paid $500 in cash for a confidential, immediate consultation. I registered under my middle name. The attending doctor was a tired-looking man with graying hair. He seemed surprised to have an elderly walk-in patient ask for a chemical breakdown. I sat on the crinkling paper of the examination table. I handed him the white capsule. I told him I needed to know exactly what was inside it. He frowned, turning the capsule over. But the cash payment left him no room for argument. He ran the analysis in their back lab. 45 minutes later, the doctor returned. The color had drained from his face. He locked the clinic door behind him. "Are you sitting down, sir?" the doctor asked. His voice carried a weight of deep, terrifying professional concern. "Tell me," I demanded smoothly. "These are not vitamins," the doctor stated flatly. "They do not contain a single trace of any dietary supplement. This is a concentrated, generic formulation of a potent antipsychotic medication. It is a heavy neuroleptic drug designed to treat extreme cases of violent schizophrenia." The clinical walls closed in around me. "The dosage in this capsule is incredibly high," the doctor continued, his eyes wide with alarm. "Introducing this into a healthy, 68-year-old brain would rapidly mimic the late stages of severe dementia. It shuts the nervous system down. It induces artificial tremors, profound confusion, and overwhelming lethargy. You will be trapped inside your own failing body." He paused, looking at my steady hands. "Sir, prolonged exposure to this dosage wouldn't just make you lose your memory. It would induce massive, catastrophic cardiac arrest. It would kill you, and it would look entirely like natural causes." I took the printed lab report from his trembling hands. I thanked him for his diligence. I politely declined his offer to involve the local sheriff. I walked back out to my rusted truck. My own flesh and blood had systematically planned to poison me. She had smiled in my face, kissed my cheek, and handed me the very chemical chains meant to drag me into a padded cell, and eventually a coffin. The betrayal transcended anger. It solidified into an unbreakable sheet of pure, tactical resolve. I drove the 100 miles back to the ranch. I parked the truck under the tarp. I walked back into the house. I had to maintain the illusion of the deteriorating patriarch. Damien arrived just before 5 p.m. to perform the daily welfare check. I watched him from the kitchen window. He stepped out of his Range Rover, looking around my property with the calculating, greedy eyes of a real estate developer surveying a vacant lot. I quickly shuffled into the kitchen. I poured a mug of hot coffee. I slumped my shoulders and forced a violent, pronounced tremor into my hands. Damien let himself in. He walked into the kitchen. He did not offer a warm greeting. "Harrison," Damien said loudly, talking to me like I was deaf. "Did you take your afternoon dose?" I slowly turned my head toward him. I blinked rapidly. "Yes," I murmured, letting my voice crack. "But my head feels so heavy today, Damien. My hands won't stop shaking." I intentionally let my grip on the heavy ceramic mug slip. It crashed on the hardwood floor, sending a spray of hot coffee and jagged shards across the room. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Damien hissed. He didn't rush to see if I was burned. He looked at the mess with absolute revulsion. "Just sit down, Harrison. You are completely useless. I will get the mop." I dropped to my knees, blindly gathering the broken pieces. I kept my head bowed, playing the pathetic victim. From my position on the ground, I had a clear view of the large, sliding glass door leading to the patio. The setting sun hit the glass, turning it into a perfect dark mirror. I looked at the reflection. Damien was standing by the utility closet. He pulled out his phone. He typed a rapid message. He looked back at me, kneeling in the spilled coffee. He sneered, a look of cold, calculating impatience. He lifted the phone to his ear. "Caroline," Damien whispered into the receiver. The kitchen was quiet enough for the sound to carry directly to me. "The neuroleptics are working perfectly. He is practically a vegetable. Make sure the life insurance policy clears underwriting tomorrow. The old man is almost past his expiration date." He hung up the phone. I knelt there on the floor, clutching the broken ceramic. The sharp edge cut into my palm. A single drop of my blood mixed with the spilled coffee. Life insurance policy. Expiration date. They didn't just want the ranch. They were actively monetizing my murder. I took a slow, deep breath. The icy focus of a federal judge washed over my entire being. The gavel dropped in my mind. Court was officially in session. I knelt on the hardwood floor, the broken shards of the ceramic mug digging into my knees. The sharp pain was grounding. It kept me tethered to the physical world while my mind constructed a gallows. Life insurance policy. Expiration date. If I were merely a father, my heart would have shattered. But the father was dead. He died the moment that pill dissolved in the clinic's testing beaker. The man kneeling in the spilled coffee was Elias Thorne, former chief judge of the federal circuit, and I was currently presiding over a capital murder conspiracy. I did not scream. I did not confront him. The first rule of any successful prosecution is to let the criminals believe they are operating in the shadows. A premature confrontation is a defense attorney's greatest weapon. You do not just catch a rat. You build a maze it cannot escape from. Damien walked back into the kitchen, carrying a mop. He looked irritated, glancing at his reflection in the dark glass of the oven door to adjust his expensive silk tie. As he turned, the fabric of his tailored suit jacket parted. A heavy silver keyring dangled from his interior pocket. The kitchen light caught a singular, uniquely shaped brass key. My breath stopped. I recognized the precise grooves of that brass key immediately. It was the master key to the heavy, fireproof floor safe hidden beneath the false oak paneling in my study. A month ago, I had noticed it missing from my nightstand. Caroline had spent 2 hours helping me search for it. She held my hands. She looked me in the eyes with manufactured pity. She gently told me that my memory was failing, that I must have misplaced it during one of my confused episodes. She had used my own stolen property to lay the foundation of my gaslighting. And all along, that key had been resting comfortably in her husband's pocket. If Damien had that key, they were accessing my private vault. They were accessing the original deeds to the ranch, the bearer bonds, and the legal architecture of my entire estate. I needed to confirm he was actively using it. I needed his fingerprints on that brass. Decades ago, I presided over a massive RICO case involving an East Coast crime syndicate. The star witness was a street-level informant named Jimmy. He was a master pickpocket. During a recess in my chambers, Jimmy had explained the exact mechanics of a successful dip. He told me that theft was never about speed. It was about misdirection. You have to create a physical shock, a sudden, overwhelming point of contact that completely overloads the target's sensory perception, rendering them blind to the subtle movement of your hands. I never, in my wildest dreams, imagined I would employ a mobster street trick against my own son-in-law. I gripped the edge of the kitchen island. I pushed myself up. I made my legs shake violently. "Damien," I gasped, letting my voice rattle. "I need water." He rolled his eyes. "Just sit down, Elias. You're making a mess." As he reached out to push me back toward the living room, I executed the maneuver. I allowed my eyes to roll back into my head. I let all the tension drain completely from my knees. I simulated a sudden, massive fainting spell. My dead weight collapsed forward, directly into Damien's chest. He grunted in shock. The mop clattered to the floor. He instinctively threw both of his arms around my torso to catch me, struggling under my heavy frame. His hands gripped my shoulders tight. His entire biological focus was consumed by the sudden, overwhelming physical burden of my collapsing body. He was completely overloaded. In that exact fraction of a second, while his attention was entirely focused on keeping us both from crashing to the floor, my right hand slipped smoothly and silently into the open interior pocket of his jacket. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the brass key. I traced the grooves. I confirmed the shape. It was unmistakably the key to my vault. I did not extract it. If I stole the key now, he would notice it missing. He would panic. He would change his timeline. I needed him to feel secure. I needed him to use that key while I was watching. I let the key drop back in his pocket. The entire physical contact took less than 2 seconds. "What is wrong with you?" Damien snapped, struggling to shove my heavy frame back into a wooden chair. "Sit down, Elias. Come on." I slumped against the backrest. I let out a long, ragged breath. I blinked wildly, as if I had just regained consciousness. "I am sorry," I whispered weakly. The room just went completely black. I felt so dizzy. Damien dusted off his expensive coat with a look of utter, profound revulsion. "This is exactly why you cannot be left alone anymore," he muttered. He typed a rapid message on his smartphone. "You are becoming a massive liability. I will get you a glass of tap water, and then I have to leave. I have a business meeting." He shoved a glass of water onto the table. He turned on his heel and walked out the front door. I listened to his luxury SUV start up and crunch its way down the long dirt driveway. I did not move until the sound of the engine completely faded into the howling Montana wind. Then, I sat up perfectly straight. The tremors vanished. The weakness evaporated. The rage that had been simmering in my chest crystallized into pure, unadulterated purpose. They had poisoned my body. They had insulted my intelligence. Now, they were preparing to rob my vault. The time for hiding was over. It was time to build the gallows. I waited until the sun dipped below the jagged mountain peaks and the ranch was wrapped in total, isolating darkness. I knew better than to use the landline or my personal cell phone. If Caroline and Damien were bold enough to drug me and steal the key to my safe, they were certainly capable of monitoring my digital call logs. I pulled the cheap, prepaid plastic burner phone from my boot. I had purchased it with cash during my trip to the rural clinic. I powered it on. I dialed a number I had memorized 20 years ago. The line rang twice. A deep, gravelly voice answered. Marcus Vance. Marcus was a titan in the world of corporate and civil law operating out of New York. A man who navigated courtrooms with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a great white shark. We had fought on opposite sides of the aisle many times during my tenure on the bench. Over the decades, that professional rivalry had melted into a profound, unspoken respect. He was the only person on earth I could trust with a conspiracy of this magnitude. Marcus, I said, keeping my voice low, is Elias Thorne. I am using an unregistered burner phone. Do not return a call to my primary number. There was a brief pause on the line. "Elias," Marcus replied. His tone immediately shifted from casual evening chatter to strict, lethal business. "You do not buy burner phones to chat about the weather. What is happening?" I laid out the facts with the clinical, chilling detachment of a prosecutor presenting an indictment. I told him about the property tax default notice. I told him about the antipsychotic drugs my own daughter had disguised as vitamins. I told him about the stolen key to my hidden floor safe. And I told him about the overheard phone call regarding an expiration date. I did not offer emotional commentary. I simply gave him the evidence. Marcus remained dead silent for a long moment after I finished. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet, terrifying anger. "They're setting you up for a fraudulent conservatorship," Elias, Marcus said. "They're trying to medically establish your incompetence so they can seize your assets." But the insurance comment, that crosses the line into a homicide conspiracy. "We need to document their actions immediately, before they strike. I need eyes inside my own house. Marcus," I told him, "I need them to catch Damien opening that safe. But it has to be completely off the books. No official security companies. No digital paper trails they can subpoena. I have a private technical team," Marcus assured me. "Former federal surveillance experts who work exclusively for my firm. They're ghosts. I will have them flown into Bozeman tonight. Leave the back door of the ranch unlocked." The trap was in motion. The hours before midnight crawled by with agonizing slowness. I sat in the dark living room, watching the faint moonlight filter through the heavy snow falling outside the windows. Precisely at 2 a.m., two unmarked, dark, snow-dusted SUVs rolled silently up my dirt driveway. Their headlights were completely extinguished. Three men dressed in dark, nondescript tactical clothing slipped out of the vehicles. They moved swiftly toward my back porch. They wore surgical gloves. They carried specialized, heavy gear bags that looked completely ordinary from the outside. I unlocked the heavy wooden door. I let them inside. They did not ask questions. They offered absolutely zero pleasantries. They simply went to work with a level of quiet, terrifying professionalism that instantly put me at ease. The lead technician handed me a secure, encrypted tablet. He explained that they would be installing military-grade micro cameras directly into the architectural crown molding of the living room and my private study. The lenses were no larger than the head of a pin, completely invisible to the naked eye. The video feeds would be heavily encrypted and uploaded directly to a secure server at Marcus's law firm in New York. If Caroline or Damien stepped foot in this house, every movement, every whisper would be captured in 4K resolution and preserved as irrefutable legal evidence. I directed them to the study first. I pointed to the heavy oak bookshelves lining the far wall. The floor safe was hidden beneath a false section of hardwood directly below the bottom shelf. The technicians nodded. They began drilling microscopic holes into the plaster near the ceiling. By 4 a.m., the house was wired. The men cleaned up every single speck of plaster dust. They vanished into the snowy night like phantoms. The following morning broke with a heavy, gray overcast. I sat alone at the kitchen island. A steaming mug of black coffee rested untouched beside the encrypted tablet Marcus had provided. My hands were perfectly steady. At exactly 1:15 p.m., the crunch of gravel signaled the arrival of a vehicle. I was sitting in my bedroom, intentionally leaving the main areas of the house completely empty. I had sent a text message to Caroline an hour earlier, claiming I was feeling incredibly weak and was going to take a long, medicated sleep. She had undoubtedly relayed that information to Damien, giving him the perfect, uninterrupted window of opportunity. I stared at the tablet screen. The front door opened with a quiet click. Damien stepped into the hallway. He moved with a practiced, predatory caution. He stepped lightly on the hardwood floors to avoid making the old boards creak. He paused at the base of the staircase, listening intently for any sound coming from my bedroom above. Satisfied that the heavy dose of antipsychotics was keeping me unconscious, he turned. He walked directly into the study. The micro camera positioned perfectly in the crown molding captured his face in pristine, flawless detail. There was no hesitation in his movements. He knew exactly where he was going. I watched, my jaw clenched, as the man who had married my daughter walked around my heavy mahogany desk. He knelt on the antique Persian rug. He rolled the heavy woven fabric back to expose the bare floorboards beneath. He ran his fingers along the edge of the wood, found the hidden latch, and lifted the false panel. The heavy steel door of my floor safe was exposed. He reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out the brass key. He inserted it into the lock, turned it sharply, and pulled the heavy door open. A sickening wave of violation washed over me as I watched him reach his hands into my private vault. He pulled out thick manila folders, the original deeds to the ranch, the property lines, the bearer bonds, the comprehensive outlines of my massive financial portfolios. He spread the documents across my desk like a feast. He pulled a sleek smartphone from his jacket pocket. He activated the camera. For the next 20 minutes, the high-definition feed recorded Damien meticulously photographing every single page. He captured account numbers, routing codes, signature baselines, and legal descriptions of my assets. He was building a complete digital replica of my entire estate. I watched him carefully place the folders back into the safe. He locked the steel door, replaced the floorboard, and rolled the rug back into its exact original position. He left the house as silently as he had arrived. When the screen finally showed an empty room, my burner phone vibrated. It was Marcus. His voice was heavy with dark, violent realization. "Elias," Marcus said. His tone was stripped of any professional detachment. "I put my best forensic accountants on Damien yesterday morning. I told them to dig into his crypto venture capital firm, to tear apart his public filings and find out exactly what his financial situation looks like." "What did they find?" I asked. My voice was dangerously calm. "It is a sham, Elias. The entire firm is a hollow shell company. He lost everything in the crypto crash 2 years ago. He has been hemorrhaging money, living completely on credit to maintain the illusion of a successful corporate lifestyle." Marcus took a heavy breath. "But it is much worse than just being broke. He owes money, a staggering amount of money." "How much?" I demanded. $20 million, Marcus replied. The number hung in the air like a physical threat. And he does not owe it to conventional banks. He owes it to a shadow banking syndicate operating out of Chicago. These are not people who send collection letters, Elias. These are ruthless, violent creditors. Damien is completely backed into a corner, and his time is running out. He is pledging the ranch and your investments to save his own life. The absolute brilliance of their malicious plan left me momentarily breathless. They were not just greedy children waiting for an inheritance. They were desperate criminals using my life as a shield against a violent cartel. "But that is not the worst part," Marcus whispered. The silence on the line grew incredibly heavy. "Tell me," I commanded. "My team dug into Caroline's financial footprint," Marcus said. 3 weeks ago, she opened a massive life insurance policy. It is an accelerated payout policy. The beneficiary is exclusively her. My blood froze. "For how much?" $10 million, Marcus stated. "Elias, the policy explicitly covers death by natural causes, including sudden cardiac arrest, the exact kind of fatal heart failure the doctor warned you those antipsychotic pills would eventually induce. They're not just trying to steal your ranch to pay off the syndicate. They are chemically inducing a heart attack to collect $10 million. They're trying to murder you." I stared at the blank screen of the tablet. The pieces of the puzzle rapidly snapped into place. The fake vitamins, the isolated farm, the stolen documents, the expiration date, every sweet smile Caroline had given me, every cup of coffee she had poured. It was all a calculated step toward my execution. I looked around my kitchen, thinking of Sarah. We had built this life with our own hands. We had poured our blood and sweat into this land. The thought of losing it to a Chicago crime syndicate and losing my life to my own daughter's greed ignited a fire within me that burned hotter than any case I had ever presided over. I closed the connection with Marcus. I powered down the tablet. I knew I could take the camera footage to the police right now and have him arrested for elder abuse and burglary. But that was not enough. If I struck too early, Damien would claim he was merely organizing my files for my own protection. Caroline would cry in front of a judge, claiming she was a devoted daughter trying to help a father suffering from severe cognitive decline. They would hire expensive defense attorneys and spin a narrative of a tragic family misunderstanding. I needed them to cross a line they could never, ever walk back from. I needed them to attempt a blatant, undeniable act of massive fraud right in front of the hidden lenses. I needed them to bring the law directly to my doorstep. To do that, I had to create a ticking clock. I had to threaten the one thing they desperately needed to appease the Chicago syndicate, the ranch. I dialed Caroline. I intentionally shallowed my breathing. I made my voice sound frail. Hello. When she answered, her tone was brisk and impatient. The sound of a woman interrupted during a busy day of spending stolen money. I asked her if she and Damien could drive out to the ranch that afternoon. I told her I was having a rare good day. A small, fleeting window where the fog in my brain had briefly cleared. I told her I needed to discuss something incredibly important regarding the future of the estate. I heard the hesitation in her voice, followed immediately by the familiar, calculating shift in her tone. She promised they would be there by 4 p.m. I spent the next 2 hours preparing my physical performance. I brewed a pot of coffee and poured it down the sink, leaving an empty, stained mug on the table. I ruffled my gray hair. I unbuttoned the collar of my flannel shirt. I draped a heavy, woven wool blanket over my knees as I sat in the leather armchair in the living room. I positioned myself perfectly within the optimal viewing angle of the micro camera Marcus's team had embedded in the crown molding. I was the bait, and I was sitting squarely in the center of the trap. At 4 p.m., Damien's Range Rover crunched up the snowy driveway. Caroline walked through the front door a few moments later. She carried a plastic grocery bag filled with cheap canned soup, a pathetic, highly visible prop to demonstrate her supposed caregiving. She set the bag on the granite counter. She walked into the living room, stopping a few feet away from my chair. Damien stood behind her, his arms crossed. "You said you were having a clear day, Dad," Caroline noted. Her eyes darted around the room to ensure we were alone. "You sounded quite serious on the phone. What's going on?" I looked up at her. I kept my hands perfectly still to sell the illusion of temporary, desperate lucidity. I let my eyes well up with tears. I drew on the genuine, profound heartbreak I felt over her catastrophic betrayal. "Caroline," I began, letting my voice crack with manufactured sorrow. "I know what is happening to me. I know my mind is slipping away. The fog is getting thicker every single day. Soon, I will not remember my own name, let alone the legacy your mother and I built on this land." I took a slow, rattling breath. She stepped closer. Her posture stiffened. She was clearly trying to gauge whether this was a genuine moment of clarity or just another symptom of the heavy antipsychotics she had been feeding me. "Oh, Dad, do not speak like that," she murmured. She reached out to pat my shoulder with a cold, hesitant hand. "The vitamins are helping. You just need more time." "No, Carolina, insista." I gently pulled my shoulder away from her toxic touch. We both know the agonizing truth. I am losing the battle. But today, right now, my thoughts are crystal clear, and I realize I have a profound responsibility to protect this property before I am entirely gone. I looked past her, making direct eye contact with Damien. "I cannot let this beautiful ranch decay while I sit in a nursing home," I said. "I cannot burden you and Damien with the heavy financial upkeep of this massive 300-acre estate." Caroline froze completely. Her manicured hand hovered in the empty air between us. I watched the blood slowly, deliciously drain from her face. Her skin turned a pale, sickly white. "What are you saying, Dad?" she asked. Her voice dropped to a harsh, terrified whisper. I looked directly into her eyes, delivering the fatal blow with absolute, surgical precision. "I'm saying that I called my estate lawyer in Bozeman this morning." I lied smoothly. I told him to draft the final paperwork. "This coming Monday, at exactly 9 a.m., I am signing the entire ranch, the house, and the surrounding acreage over to the Montana Wildlife Conservancy. They will preserve the land in your mother's name forever. The estate will be gone, Caroline, but it will serve a noble, untouchable purpose. Caroline stared at me as if I had just plunged a jagged dagger directly into her chest. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. The meticulous, condescending mask she wore so flawlessly completely shattered. She needed this property to satisfy the violent syndicate breathing down her husband's neck. She needed my estate to secure the $10 million life insurance payout. Without the ranch as collateral, Damien was a dead man, and her lavish lifestyle would violently crumble into dust. But Monday, she stammered. Her eyes were wide with unadulterated panic. "Dad, you cannot do that. You're not thinking clearly. You cannot just give away the family inheritance on a whim. Damien and I have plans for this place. You have to cancel that meeting." I shook my head slowly, letting a gentle, resigned smile touch my lips. "No, y whisperat sufli. My mind is made up. Once my signature is on that paper on Monday morning, the transfer is irrevocable. It is done." She took 2 steps backward. She physically reeled from the absolute finality of my statement. Her hands began to shake with the very tremors she had been trying to artificially induce in me. She grabbed her purse from the sofa. She was entirely unable to formulate a coherent sentence. I have to go," she gasped. She turned abruptly toward the hallway. "I will be right back." She practically sprinted out the front door. Damien chased after her, his face a mask of pure terror. I listened to the frantic roar of the Range Rover engine as they sped down the snowy driveway. The ticking clock was deafening. I had given them exactly 48 hours before the estate vanished. They could not wait. They would have to strike this weekend. The bait was taken. The predators were rushing headlong into the steel jaws of my trap. Friday morning arrived with a deceptive, icy stillness. I woke up at 5 a.m. My mind was sharper than it had been in decades. I sat at my kitchen table with a hot cup of black coffee. I was waiting for Marcus to finalize the federal injunctions. At exactly 6:15 a.m., the tranquility of the mountain morning was shattered. The harsh crunch of heavy tires tore up my gravel driveway. I did not hear just one vehicle. I heard a convoy. I walked to the kitchen window. I pulled back the curtain. 3 county sheriff cruisers were parked at aggressive angles across my front lawn. Their light bars flashed bright blue and red against the morning frost. Behind them, a sterile white passenger van bearing the seal of the Department of Social Services blocked the main exit. Doors slammed in unison. Uniformed deputies stepped out. They adjusted their utility belts, moving with the cautious, practiced tension of law enforcement responding to a volatile situation. 2 individuals in plain civilian clothes, a man and a woman holding thick clipboards, stepped out of the white van. I stood frozen by the sink. I had played the bait too well. I had forced a ticking clock onto Damien and Caroline, anticipating they would try to force my signature on new deed. Instead, they bypassed me completely. They used the legal system itself as a weapon. Heavy, authoritative knocks pounded against my front door. The sound echoed through the timber farmhouse like gunfire. I took a deep breath. I forced my racing heart to slow down. I had to maintain the facade. I shuffled toward the foyer, letting my hands develop a visible, violent tremor. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. A tall sheriff's deputy with a stern face stood on the porch. "Elias Thorne?" the deputy asked. His tone left no room for debate. "Yes," I stammered. I made my voice sound weak and hopelessly confused. "What's happening here? Is there a problem?" The female social worker stepped forward. Her face was a mask of practiced, clinical sympathy. "Mr. Thorne, my name is Brenda. We are here from Adult Protective Services. We have received an emergency court order regarding your immediate welfare and the management of your estate." She handed me a thick stack of legal documents. The heavy black text on the first page jumped out at me. Emergency ex parte conservatorship order. An ex parte order meant it had been filed and granted in secret, without my knowledge, without my presence, and without giving me any opportunity to defend myself in a courtroom. It is a legal maneuver strictly reserved for the most extreme, life-threatening cases of mental collapse. "This cannot be right," I whispered, staring blindly at the deputy. "I am fine. "I am perfectly fine." "I am sorry, sir," the deputy said. His hand rested cautiously on his service belt. "But the judge has temporarily stripped you of your legal autonomy. You're no longer permitted to make financial or medical decisions for yourself. We are here to escort you to a secure medical facility for a mandatory psychiatric evaluation." Before I could respond, another vehicle sped up the driveway. It was Caroline. She slammed on the brakes, leapt out, and rushed toward the porch with Damien close behind her. Caroline was crying. She clutched a tissue to her face, playing the role of the devastated, heartbroken daughter to absolute perfection. "Oh, Dad," Caroline sobbed. She reached out to grab my arm. "I'm so sorry it had to come to this. We tried so hard to take care of you at home, but you were just slipping away too fast. You almost burned the house down. We had to protect you from yourself." I looked at the documents trembling in my hands. The attached exhibits told the entire horrifying story. Damien had used his shadow syndicate connections to purchase forged medical documentation. There were signed affidavits from 2 private, out-of-state neurologists who had never even met me. They testified under oath that I was suffering from aggressive, late-stage chemical dementia. They had successfully weaponized the law against a former federal judge. "Please, you have to listen to me," I begged. I turned toward the social worker, dropping my voice into a desperate plea. "They are lying to you. They have been poisoning me." Brenda sighed, offering a sad, patronizing smile. "We know about the medication, Mr. Thorne. Your daughter explained that you have been refusing your prescribed treatments and hiding your pills. That is why you are experiencing these severe paranoid delusions. We are just going to get you some help." Damien smirked triumphantly as the tall deputies escorted me outside toward the waiting transport van. I lowered my head, hiding a subtle, predatory smile. They had missed the hidden burner phone deep inside the interior pocket of my heavy wool cardigan. The cold morning air bit deeply through my thin clothes as the deputies guided me toward the back of the van. Brenda smiled gently and stepped aside, gesturing for Caroline to approach the van for a final goodbye. Caroline walked slowly across the frozen gravel. Her face was a portrait of absolute devastation to anyone watching from distance. But as she drew closer, the sorrow in her eyes vanished. It was instantly replaced by an icy, triumphant gleam. She stepped into my personal space. She wrapped her arms tightly around my neck in what appeared to be a desperate, loving embrace. She pressed her mouth directly against my ear. Her breath was warm, but her voice was as cold as a morgue. "Do not fight it, Dad," she whispered. The words sliced through the air like a razor blade. "You lost. We are in charge now. Just go quietly, and maybe I will put you in one of the nicer facilities before your heart gives out." She pulled back, kissed me softly on the cheek, and let out another loud, dramatic sob for the benefit of the social workers. I looked at her. I let my hand shake. I gave her the ultimate satisfaction of thinking I was terrified. The deputies gently guided me up the steps and into the back of the transport van. The heavy metal doors slammed shut securely behind me, plunging the compartment into a dim, sterile light. I heard the lock engage from the outside. The engine roared to life. The van began to move slowly down the dirt driveway. I sat on the hard plastic bench. As the initial shock of the ambush faded, a dark, suffocating realization washed over me. The bitter irony of my situation was almost too profound to process. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back exactly 25 years. During my prime years on the federal bench, I had been appointed to a special state commission tasked with rewriting the very conservatorship laws that were currently being used to strip me of my freedom. I was the one who wrote the specific emergency ex parte loophole to save vulnerable seniors from rapid financial abuse. My own daughter had turned my masterpiece into a weapon, but they had made one fatal error. They assumed that by removing me from the ranch, they had severed my ability to fight back. They thought the game was over. They had absolutely no idea that Marcus Vance was sitting in his New York office holding digital copies of their shadow banking debts, the $10 million life insurance policy, and the 4K video of Damien cracking my safe. I reached my right hand inside the thick wool of my cardigan. I traced the rectangular outline of the burner phone with my thumb. Once the harsh antipsychotics were entirely out of my system, my mind would be as sharp as a scalpel. I would pass the psychiatric tests flawlessly. And the moment I was alone in a secure room, I would authorize Marcus to drop the hammer. They believed they had successfully imprisoned me. They had unknowingly given me the perfect legal alibi, while my final trap snapped firmly shut around their greedy throats. The psychiatric ward was a clinical purgatory. For 48 hours, I played my part flawlessly. I adopte da vacant, olho stare. I answered the facility doctors with deliberate confusion. I mixed up dates. I let my hands tremble. The doctors took meticulous notes, entirely convinced they were observing a tragic case of rapid-onset dementia. I spat out every pill they handed me. My mind cleared completely. Monday morning arrived with a cold, relentless drizzle. The facility staff woke me just before dawn to prepare for transport to the federal courthouse. A stern orderly handed me a plastic bag containing a change of clothes that Caroline had packed and sent over. It was a calculated, vicious insult. Instead of my tailored suits, she had sent a faded, mud-stained plaid country shirt, a pair of worn denim trousers, and my scuffed leatherwork boots. She even included the battered canvas hat I used for splitting firewood. The intention was crystal clear. She wanted me to walk into that courtroom looking exactly like a confused, unkempt farmer who had completely lost his grip on reality and basic hygiene. I put the clothes on slowly. I did not comb my hair. I allowed the gray stubble on my cheeks to remain untouched. When the transport deputies escorted me into courtroom 4, I shuffled my feet. I kept my head bowed, clutching the worn hat tightly to my chest. I looked like a man who had already surrendered. The courtroom was relatively empty. Sitting at the plaintiff's table was Caroline. She was dressed in a conservative, dark navy suit that screamed responsible daughter. Beside her sat Damien, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and a look of profound, practiced somberness. They had hired a high-powered litigator from a prestigious city firm, a tall man with slick-back hair and an expensive silk tie. I was guided to the defense table. I sat down heavily. I risked a brief upward glance. Caroline was looking at me. A subtle, incredibly cruel smirk played at the very corners of her mouth. It was the look of a predator watching a trapped animal breathe its last breath. Damien leaned over and whispered something to his wife, shaking his head with a display of fake, patronizing pity. They were entirely convinced they had executed the perfect crime. The bailiff announced the arrival of the judge. Everyone in the room stood except for me. I remained seated, playing the part of a man too disoriented to understand basic courtroom protocols. The judge, a stern-looking man with graying hair and sharp glasses, took his seat at the elevated bench. He looked down at his heavy docket. The high-priced lawyer standing next to Caroline immediately launched into his opening statement. He spoke with the smooth, polished cadence of a man who was used to winning unopposed battles. "Your Honor," the lawyer began, "we are here today under incredibly tragic circumstances. We are petitioning the court to make the emergency conservatorship of Mr. Elias Thorne permanent. This is a decision his family has made out of absolute, unavoidable necessity for his own physical safety." The lawyer picked up a thick binder. He proceeded to present a slam-dunk case of severe, irreversible dementia. He cited the sworn affidavits from the 2 out-of-state neurologists. He described my supposed symptoms: violent paranoia, inability to recognize family members, and wandering into freezing temperatures. He painted a masterful, devastating portrait of a man whose mind had dissolved into a dark, terrifying abyss. I listened to his lies without moving a single muscle. "As you can clearly see from the medical exhibits, Your Honor," the lawyer concluded, stepping back with a solemn nod, "my client's father is a profound danger to himself. We respectfully request that his daughter, Caroline, be granted full and permanent control over his estate to ensure his safety and preserve his legacy." Caroline reached out and gently squeezed Damien's hand. She wiped a single, meticulously manufactured tear from her cheek. The entire courtroom was completely silent. Everyone was waiting for me to react. to shout, to protest, or to cry out in helpless confusion. I remained absolutely motionless. I kept my head bowed. I let them fully bathe in their false victory. Judge Gregory Mitchell adjusted his heavy, dark-framed glasses. He let out a quiet sigh. He looked down at the documents spread across his elevated bench. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Mitchell began. His voice carried a tone of gentle, practiced authority designed to soothe those suffering from cognitive decline. "I know this process can be incredibly confusing and frightening. I need you to look at me, sir, so I can ensure you understand what is happening in this courtroom today." I kept my chin tucked against my chest for 3 full seconds. I wanted the anticipation to build. I wanted Caroline and Damien to feel the absolute peak of their false triumph before I shattered it into a million microscopic pieces. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my head. I let the slumped curve of my spine straighten. I placed my hands flat on the defense table, stopping the fabricated tremors instantly. I lifted my gaze. I locked my eyes directly onto the man sitting behind the elevated mahogany bench. The transformation in Judge Gregory Mitchell was instantaneous and violently dramatic. The moment his eyes connected with mine, the professional, sympathetic expression completely melted from his face. All the color drained rapidly from his cheeks. The heavy wooden gavel slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the sound block with a dull, hollow clatter. He physically recoiled in his high-backed leather chair. "My God," Judge Mitchell whispered. His voice was incredibly thin and breathless. "Is it really him?" The slick litigator representing my daughter frowned in deep confusion. He stepped forward, raising his hands. "Your Honor, is everything all right? Do we need to call a medical professional for the respondent?" Judge Mitchell did not even acknowledge the lawyer. His eyes remained permanently fixed on my face, widening with a profound mixture of absolute shock, immense respect, and palpable fear. He was not looking at a broken farmer. He was looking at the ghost of the man who had forged his entire career. "Yes, Gregory," I said. My voice was no longer frail or confused. It resonated through the courtroom with the deep, commanding baritone I had perfected over 35 years on the federal bench. It has been a very long time. The sound of my true voice hit Caroline like a physical blow. I heard her gasp sharply, a sudden, ragged intake of air that betrayed her instant, paralyzing panic. Damien stiffened in his chair. The confident smirk was wiped completely off his face. "You are Elias Thorne," Judge Mitchell stated, leaning forward over the bench. He ignored every standard protocol of courtroom decorum. "Yes, Your Honor," the slick lawyer interjected, his voice rising in panic. "That is the respondent. We have clearly established his identity and his severe cognitive deterioration in the medical filings." Judge Mitchell snapped his gaze toward the lawyer. His eyes burned with intense judicial fury. "Shut your mouth, counselor," the judge barked. The thunderous echo rattled the windows. "You have absolutely no idea who is sitting at that defense table. 30 years ago, I was a struggling, desperate law clerk. That man sitting right there stepped in, took me under his wing, and saved my professional life. He is the most ruthless, brilliant federal judge this state has ever seen. He authored the very conservatorship statutes you are currently attempting to weaponize in my courtroom today." The courtroom was suffocatingly quiet. Caroline was breathing in rapid, shallow pants. Her hands gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table so hard her knuckles turned bruised white. "Are you seriously standing there telling me," Judge Mitchell roared at the lawyer, "that the architect of this state's financial protection laws has lost his mind?" The slick litigator took a step backward, his professional composure completely shattered. He looked down at his thick binder of forged records, then looked at Caroline, his eyes demanding an explanation she was entirely incapable of giving. I let the silence hang in the air. Then I slowly opened my fingers. The battered canvas hat fell from my grasp, hitting the polished floor with a soft, dismissive thud. I stood at my full height, my gaze hardened into a cold, penetrating stare. "Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting through the stillness like a finely sharpened blade. "With the permission of the court, I am formally requesting to waive my right to appointed counsel." I will be representing myself in this matter. Permission is unequivocally granted, Judge Thorne, Mitchell replied. His voice was thick with profound respect. The floor is entirely yours. Right on cue, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding crash. Marcus Vance strode into the chamber. He moved with the relentless momentum of an approaching storm. He radiated absolute authority. Behind him, two paralegals pushed a heavy metal trolley burdened with 6 large, tightly packed banker's boxes. Marcus marched straight down the center aisle. He completely ignored the frantic, terrified stares of my daughter and her husband. He positioned the trolley directly beside me. He offered me a single grim nod. I placed my hand on the top box. Your Honor, I announced, the petition before you today is not a tragic plea for the protection of a deteriorating patriarch. It is the final, desperate act of a highly coordinated criminal conspiracy. The petitioners are attempting to use this courtroom to finalize a $20 million fraud, and more alarmingly, to execute a premeditated homicide. I turned to look directly at Damien. His face was slick with a cold sweat. He looked like a man standing on the gallows with the rope already secured. Opposing counsel has presented you with sworn medical affidavits detailing my supposed cognitive collapse, I stated. I pulled a small, clear plastic evidence bag from my pocket and held it up. What counsel does not know is that those symptoms were chemically induced. My daughter, the loving petitioner, has been systematically poisoning me. She replaced my daily vitamin supplements with a heavy, dangerous regimen of unprescribed antipsychotic medications designed to induce severe tremors, lethargy, and temporary paranoia. Caroline let out a strangled, pathetic whimper. She buried her face in her hands. But she is only half of the equation, I said, turning my terrifying focus onto Damien. The medical fraud was merely the key to unlock the vault. Preston's crypto firm is a bankrupt shell. He is currently $20 million in debt to an illicit shadow banking syndicate operating out of Chicago, a violent organization that does not accept apologies for late payments. I walked back to the trolley. I pulled out an encrypted tablet and connected it to the courtroom monitors. To save his own life, he needed collateral. When he could not convince me to sign over my ranch, he stole the key to my floor safe. The courtroom screens flickered to life. The crystal-clear, high-definition surveillance footage began to play. Every single eye in the room watched Damien creep into my study. They watched him roll back the heavy Persian rug, open the hidden safe, and meticulously photograph my private deeds and bearer bonds. The silence was absolute as the digital proof of his undeniable felony infiltration played out. He forged my signature on multiple loan guarantee documents, pledging my entire estate to a criminal syndicate, I stated over the video. But that was not enough. They realized the syndicate would kill him before the paperwork cleared. I reached into the second banker box. I withdrew a thick, blue evidentiary folder. I slammed it onto the defense table. The sound cracked like a gunshot. 3 weeks ago, Caroline initiated a $10 million life insurance policy on my life, I announced. The words hung in the air, heavy with lethal consequence. The policy explicitly covers death by sudden cardiac arrest, the exact scientifically documented fatal side effect of prolonged exposure to the high-dosage antipsychotics she was secretly forcing down my throat. A collective gasp echoed from the sparse gallery. They were not trying to protect me in a medical facility. I roared, letting 35 years of judicial authority detonate in the room. They locked me in a psychiatric ward so I would die of a chemically induced heart attack behind closed doors, allowing them to collect $10 million and pay off the mob. This is not a conservatorship hearing, Your Honor. This is attempted murder in the first degree. The arrogant litigator finally snapped his briefcase shut. He abandoned his clients at the table and literally sprinted toward the heavy wooden doors at the back of the chamber. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with the monumental, undeniable criminal conspiracy I had just ripped wide open. Caroline was hyperventilating. She clawed at the collar of her expensive navy suit, unable to escape the crushing weight of her imminent destruction. Damien sat completely frozen. The primal, animalistic instinct to survive suddenly overrode any remaining shred of rational thought in his mind. He forcefully shoved Caroline away, knocking her chair backward with a violent thrust. She spilled onto the polished floorboards in a tangle of fabric and terrified sobs. Damien lunged forward. He scrambled over the plaintiff's table and bolted down the center aisle toward the exit. He was sprinting for his life. He didn't make it halfway. "Bailiffs, secure that man immediately," Judge Mitchell bellowed. 3 heavily armed bailiffs converged on Damien. They moved with swift, tactical precision. The largest officer hit him from the side with a punishing shoulder tackle, driving him violently into the solid oak of the spectator benches. The impact knocked the wind completely out of Damien's lungs with a sickening thud. The sharp, unmistakable ratcheting sound of steel handcuffs engaging echoed loudly through the chamber, finalizing his absolute, inescapable ruin. The trap had completely crushed them. Judge Mitchell did not hesitate for a single second. He looked down at his bench. His eyes burned with a contempt so deep it lowered the temperature in the room. "The emergency ex parte conservatorship is hereby entirely revoked," Judge Mitchell announced. He struck his gavel, declared null and void from a moment of its fraudulent inception. Furthermore, this court issues immediate bench warrants for the arrest of both Caroline Thorne and Damien Vance. The judge looked directly at the bailiffs. "The charges are severe elder abuse, premeditated wire fraud, forgery of financial instruments, and conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree. Lock them up." The courtroom erupted into chaotic, desperate motion. Additional deputies flooded through the double doors. 2 officers hauled Damien up from the floorboards, dragging him by his handcuffed arms as he sputtered incoherent pleas. His expensive charcoal suit was torn at the shoulder, covered in dust. Victoria realized she was next. She tried to stand, her legs giving out beneath her. A female deputy instructed her to place her hands behind her back. Caroline resisted, weeping hysterically, shaking her head from side to side as the cold steel bracelets clicked tightly around her slender wrists. I walked out of the courtroom. My posture was straight. My mind was sharper than it had been in decades. The corridor was cold and sterile. I saw the deputies escorting Caroline toward the main transport elevator. When she saw me step into the hallway, a new wave of frantic energy overtook her. She fought against the grip of the officers. She threw her body forward, dropping heavily to her knees on the hard marble floor directly in my path. The deputies tried to pull her up, but she went entirely limp. She wrapped her handcuffed arms around my scuffed leatherwork boots. She sobbed, a loud, guttural sound of sheer panic and complete defeat. "Dad, please!" Caroline screamed. Her voice echoed down the long, empty corridor. "You have to stop this. You cannot let them take me away. I am your daughter. I am your blood. Please, I am begging you." I looked down at the woman weeping at my feet. I saw the same face I had kissed when she was a child. But I also saw the monster who had slipped lethal antipsychotic pills into my morning coffee. I saw the predator who had whispered cruel, triumphant words into my ear as I was loaded into the back of a psychiatric transport van. I felt absolutely no pity. My heart was a stone fortress, completely impervious to the tears of a traitor. I did not bend down to comfort her. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with a quiet, lethal calm that cut straight through her hysterical wails. "You bled that out of yourself the day you put poison in my cup," I said. My voice was steady and devoid of any human emotion. I stepped backward, pulling my scuffed boots entirely out of her grasp. I turned my back on her and walked away. The rhythmic thud of my boots echoed against the marble. I did not look back, not even once, as her screams faded behind the heavy steel doors of the transport elevator. Within 6 months, the legal proceedings concluded with devastating finality. Damien was sentenced to 25 consecutive years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The shadow banking syndicate he was indebted to was simultaneously dismantled by federal authorities using the forensic accounting trails Marcus Vance had painstakingly provided. Caroline faced an equally severe reckoning. The medical fraud and attempted murder charges stripped her of her pristine social standing. She was handed a 20-year sentence in a state correctional facility, entirely isolated from the luxury and privilege she had betrayed her own father to secure. With my enemies behind bars, I returned to the sanctuary of my Montana ranch. I worked closely with Marcus to successfully establish a massive, bulletproof legal trust. I transferred the vast majority of my financial portfolio and the deed to the ranch into this protected entity. It was specifically designed to fund legal defenses and protective services for vulnerable senior citizens who found themselves trapped in abusive conservatorship. I ensured that the exact laws I had written would never again be weaponized against the innocent. It was a crisp morning in early November. The sun was just beginning to rise over the rolling, snow-capped hills of the property, casting long, golden shadows across the frost-covered grass. I walked out onto the wooden planks of my back porch. I held a steaming mug of black coffee in my hand.